In the 1965 pilot for Lost in Space, the single-level spacecraft was known as the Gemini 12. When Lost in Space was later sold and made into a television series, the Gemini 12 was replaced by a new fiberglass effects miniature, a now thicker two-level ship called the Jupiter 2. With its smaller windows and smaller underside fusion core, this more bulbous ship is noticeably different from the original and slimmer Gemini 12. This video is exclusively about the Gemini 12 and just how it was filmed for the fantastic crash sequence seen in the Lost in Space pilot. Hi, I'm Paul Lubliner, back with a follow-up to restoring the Gemini 12. Lost in Space fans will recognize this location, Red Rock Canyon in the Mojave Desert. We're here to visit the original Gemini 12 crash site and discover some behind-the-scenes secrets. And I think you're going to be thrilled with what we're seeing.
Paul, move!
What? I'm blocking it? Excuse me. That's it. The original rock formation the Gemini 12 passed on the way to a crash landing. And would you believe it? The Gemini 12 will fly on the same path it took over 50 years ago. It's going to be another fun ride. It occurred to me and my producer, Mike Clark, that it would be great to include a visit to the original Gemini 12 crash site in Red Rock Canyon. It's been on our bucket list forever, and now seems like the right time before we're too old to be stumbling around in the desert. Red Rock Canyon is 90 minutes north of Los Angeles in the Mojave Desert area. Many serials and feature films were shot on this same location. The Lydeckers were regulars at Red Rock during their time with Republic Studios. GPS coordinates were provided by Lost in Space enthusiast David Ice, who had made his own video about Red Rock several years ago. The sandstone formations have been there for eons, but they will eventually wear away faster than other formations such as the Trona Pinnacles. Almost 6 decades have passed since this location was filmed for the series pilot, and we wanted to see the crash site before any further erosion takes place. Those GPS coordinates are vital because Red Rock Canyon is a vast area, and spotting the outcrop using a pilot would be difficult. And forget about communication. No cell reception here. The hiking path is pretty benign, except for parts of the path that have been changed by weather and time. I brought along some camera equipment and extra food and water, but luck was on our side and the weather was temperate. The scenery is breathtaking, and for a while it felt like Moses lost in the desert or Lawrence of Arabia. But finally the site was reached, and we were awestruck. There it is. More than 50 years later, the legendary crash site of the Gemini 12. 50 years of rain and sun have taken a toll on the Pinnacle rock, but it's basically intact. No video or picture can do the area justice. You have to see it for yourself to understand what the Fox crew pulled off in their rigging and staging of the spectacular crash, which holds up to this day. After posing for some shots, I went exploring to understand the layout. What I realized is that the Gemini 12 was rigged to glide down an almost 150-foot run at a steep angle. The Lydecker twin wires were anchored behind a large rock that resembles an eagle's beak. Using photos of the crash from the Lost in Space pilot, we lined up the camera angles for the Pinnacle. We didn't realize it at first, but after studying our test footage, we discovered that the location used for the Cyclops giant was that very same on-wires flight path used for the ship. Another Lost in Space mystery solved. By utilizing the same location with multiple camera angle coverage, it simply proves just how clever, creative, efficient, and economical the second unit's special effects crew actually were. Here are the GPS coordinates for the Gemini 12 crash site. But if you intend to visit, remember that the weather conditions in the desert can be extreme. Bring appropriate clothing, hiking shoes, sunblock, and water. And don't come alone, because there's no communication in this neck of the woods. It's kind of like being on an alien planet. Our trip to Red Rock was really a chance to look at the scenario of restaging the Gemini 12 crash. Mike asked if I'd be able to come up with a small, non-detailed Gemini 12, also 3D printed as used to render the 9.6-inch model, and perhaps fly it by the rock formation on a short length of wire. That gave me a bigger idea, to recreate something I had daydreamed about for decades: the actual refilming of the original crash scene with a full-size replica of the Gemini 12 miniature. But would all this even be possible? Back in the day, the Fox crews simply drove their equipment trucks out to wherever they desired. For the Lost in Space pilot, studio carpenters would build platforms for the camera and the miniature's rigging and wire runs, and place numerous smoke pots employed for the atmosphere that also assisted with the wire concealment. Red Rock Canyon is now a California state park, so special effects like smoke are strictly verboten. The Fox crew of January 1965 had a full complement of workers helping Howard Leidecker rig the ship to sail past the pinnacle. We're a small group of, aging fans. The filming of a full-size copy of the Gemini 12 seemed a bit improbable, but do remember, we have that digitally produced file of the original miniature to use as a pattern. It's a real challenge because of the remote location. Our goal is to shoot at the same time of year as the January 10, 1965 filming to match up not only with the crash, but the angle of the sun. This isn't a one-man job. I needed someone with the skills to help design and build the towers for that long wire run for the saucer. I immediately contacted my longtime friend and recently retired news cameraman and video editor, Glenn Loughborough. Like me, Glenn had aspirations to become a feature film television special effects man and studied the profession in his younger years.
And the material we're using is called speed rail. It's an 1.25 inch aluminum pipe.
What's that weigh?
Well, not much at all. You want to feel?
Yeah. Whoa!
It's like a big Tinker Toy set. The base is basically 2 feet on a side. So these are 2 towers. It's the bottom one that's scary.
And the problem is that
because the ground is uneven.
Right.
And also we can pound it into the dirt a little bit.
Glenn and I did many dimensional and stress calculations for the wires, their angles, length, diameter, and load factors. So you like this wire?
Yeah, good stuff. 16th inch stainless steel aircraft cable. So I figured that'd be the stuff to use and it might not show up so much.
And the simple fact that all of it had to be transported by hand carrying or on pull carts from the Red Rock parking lot to the filming location, almost a mile, well into the park. Go ahead and build them and let's try it.
Sounds good, let's go for it.
With most of those issues resolved, I went about producing a 4-foot diameter, fiberglass exact duplicate, a perfect replica of the original film Gemini 12 miniature, one that's both fully functional, with a rotating radar dome and lighted fusion core. The miniature had to be durable enough to survive this most challenging of tasks. Okay, we've got our replica. Let's head out now and journey to Red Rock. Our logistics put us past the January 10th target date to January 31st. We arrived at the park's opening at 7 a.m., hoping to be set up and shooting by 10 a.m. As we soon learned, that was science fiction. Helping us that day was my son Adam, and he turned into our MVP. Mike, who was in charge of photography, was pressed into service with Adam. Glenn and myself as pack mules and riggers. Multiple trips would need to be made from the parking lot to the location and back. Each round trip took 60 minutes and crossed some rugged ground. After all the necessary trips to the location, we were already worn out. While Adam and I returned to the parking lot to load and transport the Gemini 12 replica, Mike and Glenn climbed the hill and hauled the upper supports. The terrain of our location was filled with loose rocks and slippery sandstone, We were very concerned about injuries, and several times each one of us stumbled and fell. The perch for the upper rig barely has room for the base, and getting it secure was time-consuming. The lower support base is the more complicated of the two and needed careful assembly. The rig has numerous pulleys and winches to wire the Gemini for flight. For extra stability, both upper and lower supports were attached to the Earth with guy wires. Crossing the numerous washes at Red Rock was physically demanding, and even more so lifting our equipment over the dry, sandy riverbed. Getting everything out there and assembling and erecting the two support towers in place had taken 5 hours. We were nudging 3 p.m. and still had to prep the Gemini.
So the way we're gonna fly it is right straight through there. Just to the right of that one rock there and to the left of that big one up there that looks like an eagle.
Now it is time to unpack our star. Seeing the replica sitting there in the actual Red Rock location setting gave me a needed burst of adrenaline. The ship looks great and only needs a couple of add-ons to be ready for flight. But moving anything, even a few feet over the rocky and uneven ground without damaging the Gemini was risky.
Okay, this is not how not to do it, boys and girls, with obstacles in the way.
I turned the replica upside down and installed a working fusion core. This core had the same mechanism I'd built for the original, with extra bright lights to show up in the harsh sunlight of Red Rock. The fusion core is secured with a total of 8 tiny screws. The radar and motor unit simply drops into place. It's a lot less grief than the fusion core. Okay, the Gemini's all there and ready for its close-up. The culmination of months of work was about to get its big test. Adam had gone to the top of the hill and run a pilot rope back down to the lower base. We're going to attach the Lydecker wires to the rope and pull them back up to the top. The Lydecker method calls for twin wires going through the Gemini model. The wire we chose was 16th-inch thick braided stainless steel. Very strong.
These are the guidelines that the ship will ride on.
We had earlier tested this material and the rig and found the braiding induced a lot of friction. That would require us to actually pull the miniature forward, even though an almost 15-degree downhill slope was present. So a motorized drive was constructed by Glenn and installed on the lower rig to pull the miniature. But the mechanics of the reels kept bunching up, causing us further delays.
This front one keeps wanting to do that. We're good.
We were repeatedly reminded just how long the run is from the lower base to the upper rig. It was a minefield of outcrops and slippery sandstone, and one misstep from Adam could send him tumbling down a rocky slope. Luckily, Adam is part mountain goat, and the Lydecker wires reach the upper perch for attachment to the static rig. Next, we feed the braided wires through the Lydecker tubes fitted inside the ship. For durability, the end couple of inches of the Lydecker tubes were made of stainless steel. You may be wondering how we're going to accomplish multiple takes. To do that, we have to return the Gemini to the upper starting point. That's what this screw eye is for, to attach a third line to a fishing rod at the upper rig and reel in the ship. By now, we were really fighting the clock. In January, daylight in Mojave begins to fade around 5 p.m., and we were barely ready to hoist the Gemini into the air. This moment was one of the most nerve-wracking for me. As Glenn spools the Lydecker wires tighter, the ship is lifting. Will the wires do their job, or have months of planning and hard work gone to waste? So far, so good. With a flip of 2 switches, I activated the radar dome and the fusion core.
Again? Yeah. All right, that'll do.
I've got to admit, it was exciting to see the Gemini raise up against a Red Rock sky with radar dome and fusion core both spinning.
God, it's floating. That's amazing.
The shadow.
Yeah, that's what really sells
shadow's
it.
excellent. It was a moment of triumph, but only a moment. It was then we realized there was a very serious problem.
All right, stop.
The braided stainless steel wires were stretching, causing sagging, far more than we'd predicted.
You got the outcroppings rising up there,
Right.
and here they drop down. Honestly, I think
It was right.
they put it over that way.
They might have, but there's no way that it's stable over there.
It was clear to me that the ship would strike one or more of the rock formations on the way down.
You see the ropes on the upper rig are taut now?
To make things worse, the pulleys on the lower tower support were becoming misaligned by the heavy load of well over 150 feet of this wire. The lower rig bolts could give way at any second, plunging the Gemini onto the rocks below. Time had run out, and I was out of energy, solutions, and soon enough, daylight. We had gotten so far, but plainly, not far enough. It was time to pull the plug.
Okay, I'm gonna start dropping it.
I'm ready.
And that's what I did. Our teardown and trek back to the parking lot ended well after dark. We had made a great effort against the logistics of the location's production and against nature itself. And they both kicked us hard, right in the rear. We came home tired and sore, licked our wounds, and began planning our return to Red Rock. The main problem with our Red Rock setup came down to two things. The lower rig was not tall enough to let the ship clear the entire path through the rock formation. We made plans to increase the height of the rig from 6 to 10 feet and higher if needed. The steel braided wires had sagged. We decided to replace them with 3/64ths of an inch music wire, same stuff used in pianos. The strength of music wire is great, it shouldn't sag, and best of all, music wire is slick, and we could drop the idea of towing the replica downhill. We'll let gravity do the work. This time we would pace ourselves by spreading the shoot over 2 days. Our first opportunity to return to Red Rock was on Friday, February 28th, a month after our January adventure. At the time, the headlines about a possible pandemic were starting to appear, but no travel restrictions or closures were yet underway to impede our shoot. Glenn had re-engineered the rigs to make them lighter and easier to cart and carry to the location. It was still a slog, but better than the month before, and the weather remained on our side. Once again, I climbed the rocky hill to install the upper rig.
This is getting old as I'm getting older and tired.
The rig went up with the same effort as before, not easy, and on a space of land just big enough for the base. The guy wires were run and attached to the cliffside. One lesson for anyone who is rigging something like this: everyone should have their own set of tools so that time and energy is not wasted hunting for them and running back and forth. The wire we're using now was frozen using dry ice for several days right up to the moment of our setup. The reason is that keeping this wire in a deeply frozen state greatly increases its strength, a process causing crystalline structure migration. But we soon found out that stringing an 8-foot length of wire for a piano is vastly different than our now 115-foot run.
What is this?
The wire quickly became snarled.
Got tangled. Just putting it in here got tangled.
No matter how I tried, the wire would not cooperate. This was very frustrating because the original braided wire strung quite easily. The advantages of the new wire, strength and smoothness, were quickly becoming a chore and a possible torpedo in our new setup plans.
This is a nightmare.
Luckily, Glenn brought multiple rolls of wire, and by spending hours unwinding a few feet at a time, we were able to run the length of the Gemini's flight path. The new lower rig was now assembled at the base of the pinnacle, much closer than before. We are counting on the increased height to clear the obstacles leading past the main rock formation. Glenn had improved the design by attaching the pulleys directly to the rig's upper frame. Next on our list was to raise the lower rig into position. As you can see, we've more than doubled our original height. Now we had a very clear path from the lower rig to the upper rig. To test the new rig, Glenn cobbled together a stunt double of the Gemini 12 replica, made from a child's metal snow sled and some PVC tubing. We ran the Lydecker wires through the PVC tubes and then onto Glenn's lower rig, where he used hand cranks to raise the wires and the stunt double. The sled was built to match the weight of the Gemini miniature. It kinda looks like a Star Trek Romulan ship.
This is working good.
It's working excellent. I think we need to take off, what, another foot or two?
It was getting late in the afternoon and things were looking pretty good. We decided to forego an actual test with the stunt double and call it a day. We covered our tools and loose equipment and left for another overnight stay in Mojave. Saturday morning, we were back at Red Rock. Because we'd done most of the heavy lifting the day before, all we had to wrangle out to the location was a Gemini replica and a few extra parts. Getting across that dry, sandy river wash was miserable, just like the previous times. The location was in good shape. The weather had been mild overnight and not disturbed our setup. I installed a fusion core in the replica and the radar dome. Remember that I'd made the Lydecker tubes out of copper with the last 2 inches of stainless steel for strength. This time, a spring was added to each opening to help reduce friction on the new solid wire.
Boy, those springs in there really make it easy, don't they?
Wrong again, Paul. The starboard side spring was preventing the wire from going all the way through. Glenn did some quick router work using another piece of wire, and finally the opening was cleared. You'll notice we're adding a foam cushion to each of the wires in front of the tower, just in case the Gemini overshoots the stopping mark and collides with the setup. Glenn has installed a GoPro inside the Gemini replica for a unique, one-of-a-kind shot that even Howard Lydecker could never have pulled off in the day. We'll see the point of view from inside the ship as it travels down the wires. We ran the 2 Lydecker wires to the lower rig and began a process of raising the Gemini into the air. We all watched the ship rise with bated breath in hopes that all our connections would hold and that the new wire would do its job. The Gemini silhouetted against the Red Rock cliffs was indeed something marvelous to see. At that point, it became obvious that we needed to reduce the height of the lower rig to put the Gemini at the same level as the original when it passed the pinnacle. As the new tower is adjustable in height, this was done without any drama. I went to the upper rig to begin winding the fishing reel that would pull back the ship up to the top and hit another snag.
Your reel isn't working, Glenn, it's slipping.
The fishing reel was tangling the line, and it wasn't strong enough to do the job. It stretched. Adam was going to have to pull the Gemini up manually, hand over hand to the starting point, while I reeled in the slack. This would have to happen for every take. There was light at the end of the tunnel. Then, we were midway up the rock formation when disaster struck.
Okay.
The starboard Lydecker wire had come loose.
Where did it break?
Yeah, it snapped right. It came right off the pin. It wasn't on there tight enough.
I'm holding it. Lower the other side so Adam can hold the ship.
Thankfully, Adam was right below the Gemini and caught it when the wire came loose. If not for his quick action, the ship would have been severely damaged, smashing into the rocks.
Say when. That's good.
Okay, that's good.
We were so close to being ready, but this last-minute fiasco might doom our plans. I reattached the wire to the pulley and re-rigged the starboard connection. Things were still shaky, and we held our breath
That'll do it, bro.
as the ship was raised again.
I think it slipped. It's hovering.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, we're back on track to pulling the Gemini to the starting point. The time was approaching, 10 a.m., roughly when the original shot was done. The sun will not be in the exact same position because of our 6-week delay, but close enough for our purposes.
Okay, are we ready? This is it. One take and it's the end of the ship. Okay, John, roll your camera. Rolling.
What you're going to see now is an edited version selected from some of our best takes with the engine sound effects added in. You'll see more on the other side, but for right now, we're relaunching the Gemini 12.
And action! Okay, perfect.
55 years from the date of the original filming, months of planning and construction, and 3 days of production, and we were finally successful. I couldn't believe it. But we had no time to waste enjoying our triumph. The ship needed to be hauled back up so that we could shoot again. Every second the Gemini was wired up is precious because we never knew when something else would go awry. Pulling the ship back to its starting point was a pain, but Adam and I managed to accomplish it in about 5 minutes per run. Let's take a look at some of our dailies. Our first take was to make certain the ship cleared all the many rocks, so it is seen here easing past the pinnacle. Overall, I'm pleased the fusion core lights are visible under the high desert brilliant sun. The wire was so smooth, we learned it was not necessary to shoot in slow motion. The real-time downward speed of the Gemini was perfect, proving that the original 1965 shoot was not at a high frame rate. In post, we had to speed up the slow motion almost 5 times to get the right look. We did a total of 12 runs that day, some of them better than others. We noticed some bounce on a take or two that resulted from an uneven start and a little breeze. And the wires were showing up more as the sun moved westward. I think the side angle captured some of the most interesting views of the Gemini as it cruised down the rock formation. And here's a longer look from Glenn's GoPro. Listen to the sound of the Lydecker wires during the descent. With all the good takes in our pockets, we decided to wrap the production around 12:30 p.m. as the wind began to pick up. We had multiple trips ahead of us to return the equipment to the parking lot. Our strike was another test of endurance and took nearly 5 hours. This time we got it all back to the parking lot before dark. What we didn't know is how much the world was about to change. A week after our shoot, the United States began shutting down due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The closures included state parks, and Red Rock would be off limits in the foreseeable future. Getting our crash recreation done at the end of February was accomplished before the door was shut. Please click like and share our video and visit the Gemini 12 YouTube channel where we've posted extra bonus footage from our production. So now you know what it takes to fly a Gemini 12. And if you try it, good luck. I'm Paul Lubliner, and I'm going to take a nap.